When we think of ancient superpowers, our minds almost always jump straight to Rome, or maybe Greece. But for centuries, the biggest player on the world stage was actually the Persian Empire. We're talking about the largest empire the world had ever seen, and yet it's so often just a footnote. So let's dive in and see what we've been missing.
So quick, do a little thought experiment with me. What's the very first image that pops into your head? Is it maybe some powerful king on a golden throne, exotic cities, or maybe giant armies clashing with a few hundred Spartans?
Yeah, for most of us, that mental image we have is almost entirely shaped by Hollywood. And let's be honest, movies aren't exactly known for getting all the historical details right. The reality of the Persian Empire is, well, it's way more complex and frankly a whole lot more interesting.
Okay, to really get a sense of the scale we're talking about here, just look at this number, 44%. At its absolute peak, the Persian Empire ruled over an estimated 44% of the entire world's population. This wasn't just a regional power, it was a true global superpower, stretching all the way from the Balkans to the Indus Valley.
So why is our view of them so skewed? Well, a huge part of the problem is where we get our information from. For centuries, the main story of Persia, the one that got passed down, was told by their biggest rivals, the Greeks.
And here's just how deep that Greek filter runs. We don't even call the most famous Persian kings by their real names. The Cyrus we all know from history class, his name was actually Kurush. Darius was Daryavaush, and the infamous Xerxes was really Shahyar Shah. The Greeks just kind of tweaked the names to fit their own language, and those are the versions that stuck around.
Luckily, we're not just stuck with the Greek side of the story anymore. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands upon thousands of clay tablets from the Persian royal archives. Now, these aren't epic poems about battles. They're the nitty-gritty, everyday records of the empire. We're talking tax receipts, payroll for workers, official orders. They give us this incredible, unfiltered look into how Persian society actually worked.
And this brings us to the guy who started it all, the empire's founder, Cyrus the Great, or as we now know, Kurush. He didn't just conquer a bunch of territory. He created a totally revolutionary new model for how to run an empire. See, the empires before him, like the Assyrians or Babylonians, they often ruled through pure terror and mass deportations. Cyrus came up with a blueprint based on a pretty surprising idea for the time: tolerance. He figured out early on that you can't hold a massive, multicultural empire together with fear alone. It just doesn't work long term.
And he really put that blueprint into practice. So when he conquered a kingdom, the defeated king was often kept on as an advisor. Local governments, he just left them in place. He famously freed the Jews from their captivity in Babylon and even helped pay to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. But, and this is the crucial point, this wasn't just Cyrus being a nice guy. The Persians themselves made up maybe 5% of the empire's population, 1 in 20. Cooperation wasn't just some lofty ideal. It was a strategic necessity for them to stay in control.
So, if Cyrus was the visionary conqueror who built the empire, you can think of Darius the Great as the genius CEO who actually organized it. He took that blueprint from Cyrus and built the sophisticated state machinery needed to make it all run smoothly. Darius sliced up the empire into provinces, which were called satrapies, and each one was run by a governor, a satrap. But he made one absolutely brilliant change. Originally, these governors controlled both the local government and the local army, while after a few rebellions, Darius stripped them of their military power. He put all the armies under a central command that was loyal only to him. This separation of powers was a game changer for maintaining stability.
He also standardized the economy. The gold daric became the universal currency, which gave the economy a real tangible structure. For example, a soldier's monthly pay was exactly 1 daric. And to put that into perspective, 1 sheep cost about 3 silver segloi. So with his monthly pay, a soldier could buy about 7 sheep. That level of economic organization was just way ahead of its time.
And to connect this massive empire, Darius built the Royal Road, a whole network of paved roads with relay stations every few miles. This allowed for an unbelievably efficient postal system. You know that famous quote, the one we all associate with the US Postal Service? Well, that was actually written by the Greek historian Herodotus, and he was describing Persian mail carriers over 2,000 years ago.
All right, let's bust a couple of common myths while we're at it. First, the immortals, Persia's elite soldiers. They weren't actually immortal. Shocker. I know. The name is most likely a Greek mistranslation of the Persian word for companions.
The only thing immortal about them was that their numbers were always kept at exactly 10,000. And second, the Persians weren't just fire worshippers. Their religion, Mazdaism, was a really early form of Zoroastrianism. It was henotheistic, which means they worshipped one supreme god, Ahura Mazda, but they acknowledged that other lesser gods still existed. Fire wasn't a god, it was a sacred symbol of purity and divine light.
Of course, you can't really talk about Persia without talking about their most famous throwdown, the Greco-Persian Wars. Now, for Persia, this was basically a border dispute way out on the fringes of their massive empire. But for the Greeks, it was a fight for their very existence.
The whole thing kicked off when a bunch of Greek cities in what's now Turkey rebelled against Persian rule, and Athens decided to help them out. This led to a whole series of legendary confrontations. The absolutely shocking Greek win at Marathon, that famous last stand at Thermopylae, and the all-important naval battle at Salamis.
Salamis was the real turning point, and it was just a masterpiece of strategy. The Greeks used their home field advantage, their knowledge of the local waters, to trick the enormous Persian fleet into a super narrow strait. In that tight space, the Persians' biggest advantage, their sheer numbers, became totally useless. They couldn't maneuver, and the heavier Greek ships just rammed them and smashed them to pieces. It was a devastating blow that basically crippled the Persian supply lines.
Now, after getting beaten on the battlefield, the Persians didn't just pack up and go home. Nope, they just changed their strategy. Instead of sending armies, they started sending gold. They bribed Greek politicians and funded rival city-states to fight each other. It was a classic case of, if you can't beat them, make them beat themselves. And for more than 100 years, this kind of uneasy balance of power held up. But Persia's ultimate downfall wouldn't come from Athens or Sparta. It would come from up north, from a kingdom called Macedon. So you have King Philip II of Macedon. He'd managed to unite all the bickering Greek city-states and build this incredible army with one goal in mind: invade Persia. He was literally on the verge of launching his campaign when, bam, he's stabbed to death by his own bodyguard. But who was really pulling the strings here?
The list of suspects here reads like something out of a political thriller. Was it the bodyguard, acting alone out of jealousy? Was it the Persians, taking out their biggest threat? Was it Philip's ambitious wife, trying to secure power? Or was it even his own son? The young man who stood to gain the most, Alexander. It's still one of history's great unsolved mysteries.
Whatever the real story is, Philip's death put his 18-year-old son on the throne. Alexander inherited his father's army and his father's plan. And in just over a decade, this kid, Alexander the Great, a true military genius, leading the unstoppable Macedonian phalanx, completely conquered the entire Persian Empire. All told, the Achaemenid Empire, the dynasty that Cyrus started, lasted for 220 years. Now, you might look at this chart and think, that's way shorter than the Roman Republic or Empire. And you'd be right. But its impact was just as profound, if not more so. The Persian model, this tolerant, multi-ethnic, centrally run state with its roads and its currency, it became the blueprint for empires that came after, including Alexander's own, and in many ways, even Rome itself. Because here's the thing, Alexander may have conquered the physical empire, but the idea of Persia was just too strong to erase. For centuries after, new dynasties saw themselves as the rightful heirs to Cyrus and Darius. The Persian language became the language of art and poetry across Central Asia. Zoroastrianism would go on to shape key ideas in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The empire itself fell, sure, but it also evolved. It adapted, and its legacy never truly vanished. It's still echoing today in the modern nation of Iran.